Today's show is sponsored by libertarian conspiratorial fantasy author Jack Casey. Whether you're looking for a 3-book fantasy sci-fi epic of love, death, and dystopian civil war like the Royal Green series, or just looking for a quick, dark, comedic cultural commentary tale about a transsexual slayer of COVID regime vampires, like his latest book, WVW, Jack Casey Books will keep you adequately entertained and pondering the universe to your weird little heart's content. He's the Ayn Rand meets Stephanie Meyer meets somebody who actually writes entertaining books with his own unique little downer-esque flair. Find out more about Jack Casey Books at the aptly named jackcaseybooks.com. Once again, that is jackcaseybooks.com. Have you guys heard of Matt Miller? He's not only the guy who paints those amazing portraits of all your favorite heroes in the Liberty Movement and in pop culture, but he's also now an official sponsor of this show. From Murray Rothbard to Ron Paul, Dr. Robert Malone to Darth Maul, Matt Miller's Liberty Portraits has something fun for everyone to spice up your home or office and showcase your heroes. Go check out his incredible work at libertyportraits.com. Grab a print to impress your friends, hire him for a custom portrait, or bring him out to a festival to capture your event in real life in a beautiful and unique way. To find out more, just head over to libertyportraits.com. Once again, that is libertyportraits.com. Ladies and gentlemen, the media, it's broken. Possibly beyond repair. Not sure if there's anything we can do about it, but today we're going to find out. And before we get into this wonderful conversation with Isaac Saul, I need you to do one very important thing for me, and that is go out, share this now, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies, whatever side of the political spectrum they're on. They're all libertarians, I know they are, except for your enemies. Go share it with everybody on the Twitters and all the things that you're supposed to, the things that I'm supposed to tell you. Also, Joey Two Guns is already one step ahead of me. He's saying fake super chat. Don't forget to talk about fake super chats. Fake super chat. If you guys have a super chat, feel free to put fake super chat in all caps if you want me to read it, because YouTube hates us, as they always have, and they don't allow us to do that. But we're gonna roll this thing. You're gonna go share it, like you said you would, and then we're gonna get going. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get weird.
The following is a Goulash Media production. goulashmedia.net.
Remember a simpler time when it was okay to be weird, have fun, and think for yourself?
Well, those days are over. The art of conversation itself is dead. Sacrificed on the altar of divide and conquer and disguised as political correctness and spared feelings. I believe that unity can only come from truth, and that the only way to find truth is by exploring and embracing our valuable differences and having civil, open-minded, and uncomfortable discourse. Conspiracies, politics, religion, and all the taboo topics your family just praise you don't bring up around the Thanksgiving dinner table. We are here to literally change the world one uncomfortable conversation at a time. So if you're easily offended, put your big girl panties on and buckle up, Buttercup, because you chose to be here. I'm Dan Smots, you are the power, and this is The System Is Down.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the least comfortable show on the web, The System's Down, where we talk about all the uncomfortable topics like conspiracies, politics, and religion. Too much politics lately, I have to admit. It's pretty much all we talk about lately, but we might take a break from that. Before we do take a break from that, though, we got to talk about politics. Now, before we get into anything, I have to thank my favorite sponsor of all time, which is, of course, and always has been, you guys in the Downers Club, people like JC, Justin Savoy, Justico Mitchell, Silas Lane, Jason Brunson, David Bradley, Amy Lepore, Leah, and Matt Miller. My brain is not awake. It's Monday, guys. Sorry. Hefflum Swoozles, Shannon, something, Jack, Paul, Brandon, Paul Brandenberger, David White. If you want to get your name on that list and probably have it read incorrectly at some point, go on over to patreon.com/The System Is Down and sign up for the Downers Club, where you can get more weird, more raw, more offensive, more weekly content, and help the show keep growing and getting bigger and better, more beautiful, because as I mentioned earlier, nobody else lets me make money. They don't like the things that we talk about around here. I don't know. Maybe things are too polarizing and too divided. I don't know. Whatever. Maybe we'll find the solution to that today. But until then, patreon.com/The System Is Down. Get in there and join for the fun and get all the backlog of all the after parties that we've done and extended interviews and all sorts of fun things. But we are here on Monday to discuss the the death or possible slow, I can't even say slow, rapid decline of journalism, at least journalistic integrity. And to do so, we have to bring on from Tangle News, Isaac Saul. Where's my button? There it is. Isaac Saul, welcome to the show, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. That is quite the intro. I that was thoroughly entertaining the last few minutes.
Thank you. I'm sure everybody else is very sick of it by now, but I'm glad that we have some fresh eyes that still appreciate it. So, yeah, dude, tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you like go back just a ways to how you got into journalism in the beginning and where it all started?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess sort of the genesis story of Tangle is that I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is, what they call a bellwether. It's a county that often determines who's going to win national elections, like the presidential election, typically whichever way Bucks goes, Pennsylvania goes, and whichever way Pennsylvania goes, the country goes. So I grew up in a very politically divided area, basically. My friends and family were from across the political spectrum, a lot of arguing and debating, very politically engaged town. And I went to college at the University of Pittsburgh in Western PA, also similarly super politically divided, and was a journalism major and got into political reporting after college and pretty quickly realized that everything sucked and was broken. And so, after kind of seeing a little bit of how the sausage was made, also seeing how my writing was received, depending on where I published it, I basically came to the conclusion that we had two different systems of information that the country was operating on, depending on which side of the political spectrum you're on. So, nobody on the left is watching Tucker Carlson at 8 o'clock at night, and very few people on the right anymore are reading the New York Times, or if they are, they're just doing it to make fun of it. So
Right.
that's not good. That's a pretty big problem when half the country is basically totally divorced from the other half's information ecosystem. And I set out on a journey to try and create a political news source that had really high degrees of trust from people across the political spectrum. Was basically the mission statement. Was, we're going to create a one-stop shop where, regardless of what your political views are, you're going to see yourself represented, and you're also going to see a bunch of stuff that you don't agree with, that kind of challenges your perceptions, and see if we could cultivate a community of people who were both reading the same thing, even though they had really strong disagreements.
Yeah. So, you said you grew up in an area that was very politically divided. Do you consider that to be a positive or a negative? Because I grew up in Illinois, but not Chicago. So it's a blue state, but the rest of us are like pretty red and pretty, pretty corn fed, homegrown and everything. And so, like, we should have been more diverse, but it's really not diverse at all. What was kind of your experience in growing up with a little bit of both sides of the spectrum there?
Totally. I think it was unambiguously a great thing. I mean, my high school, I say this often, it was not racially diverse, but there was a ton of class diversity, which made it a really, really interesting place to grow up because, especially in today's political moment, I think that is much more determinant of the divide that we're seeing is sort of economic status and what kind of jobs people have and what kind of education they have. So for me, it was awesome. I mean, I have friends from now who are, huge Trumpers and crazy radical lefties, and I love them all for different reasons, and they all kind of hate each other and fight and bicker a lot. And oftentimes I'm the middleman, but I'm I'm very grateful for the fact that I think like I can see a lot of the really good positive things in both those sort of worldviews and in the people. I think I have a really good understanding of why people have the political views they have and what kind of experiences shape them. And yeah, I mean, it was, as a teenager, I didn't really give a shit about politics. I mean, I cared a little bit and paid attention, but I wasn't really, really engaged in it. It was once I was in college and became a journalist and after school and pursued a journalism career that I started realizing a lot of the people who I was operating around didn't have what I had and lacked a perspective that I had, which I thought was really helpful for me.
Yeah, and it seems like even around here, like like there wasn't as much diversity. So you've got the people who are have their heels dug into the right because that's the culture for the most part, and then the people who are sick of that culture who went hardcore left, and then there's just this extreme divide. Now you talked about diversity and diversity of thought, which I mean we live in a time where diversity is all the rage, but it's diversity of skin color and genitalia and things like that we're more concerned about than actual diversity of ideas. Where do you see us at right now as far as like is this cultural shift? Is it? I mean, as a kind of a conspiracy guy, I think a lot of it's manufactured. I don't think it's that much of an accident. I think it's divide and conquer. Do you think there's anything to that, or do you think it's just profits?
I mean, look, I think there's, I think there are a lot of forces at play. First of all, I think the news industry for the last 20 years, especially in the kind of 24-hour news cycle, was incentivized in a really clear way to present the most partisan and divisive news possible. I mean, we lived through an era where the more views an article got, the more money that article made for the news outlet. So if you are on an editorial team at a company that thrives on ad revenue based on ads that pop up on a web page, then you are very clearly incentivized to get as many eyeballs on that page as possible. So how do you do that? You make a really sensational sounding, scary sounding headline, so a bunch of people click on it, and you hope that they read long enough to run into an ad, so you make some money off that ad, and then you keep your sales team really happy and you don't lose your job, and you use that revenue to help grow your readership, and the circle goes on and on and on. And I mean, I saw that firsthand basically everywhere I worked. I mean, there is, we have nicer, more, I guess, palatable names for it, like creating curiosity gaps in headlines.
Right.
And, but it was the clickbait era, and the primetime news cycle now on television is driven by the same thing. The more viewers they get, especially in the kind of 18 to 31-year-old demographic, the more valuable their audience is, the more expensive they can make their ads. So how do you do that? You run the most sensational news broadcasts in primetime that you can. So the most people possible tune into it. So that's one part of it. I'd be curious to hear your conspiratorial angle on it. I don't know how much of a conspiracy it is that it benefits politicians to divide and conquer. I mean, I think it's pretty much self-evident, especially the way the system works right now. I mean, first of all, politicians are, for the most part, picking the people who elect them through gerrymandering in most districts across the country. We don't have a lot of competitive congressional races anymore, which is a huge problem. And more importantly, once they have a district that's not competitive, it means all they have to do is win a primary race in order to maintain their seat. So how do you win a primary race? Well, you keep the people who actually turn out to vote and are the most politically partisan happy. So you go further to one side of the spectrum so that those people will come out and vote for you in the primary race. So if you're a liberal running in a really blue district in New York, the more left you are, the more you're going to fire up the base and the more people are going to come out and vote for you. And that doesn't work. It creates what we have now, which is an increasing number of politicians on both sides of the aisle who I think 20 or 30 years ago would have been considered really fringe, kind of whack jobbish candidates, who are now high profile people in Congress running the country, which is not good.
Yep, there. I'm unmuted. I suppose I like when it comes to the conspiracy stuff, I kind of have like two brains where I'm just like open-minded to both sides. I'm like, it seems like all this is orchestrated, and also I feel like I'm giving these stupid people too much credit because they're not that bright when you get down to it. But like when it comes to, I don't know, things like the media, I don't remember her name, like the cover-up of the Jeffrey Epstein thing where they had the story and they didn't run the story because of this and that. or like the Covington kids story that turned out to be kind of a hoax, or the Jussie Smollett thing, or all these different things, mostly from the left. I know there's stuff on the right too, but the left is just more flagrant in my mind as far as like just flat out lying. Um, I don't know, like, what is from a journalist's perspective, what is the benefit to just flat out lying in a way that if you were of any intelligence at all, you would know that this stuff is going to come out eventually. You would know that Jussie Smollett is, I mean, it just didn't add up from the start. It seemed a little suspect, but they just immediately ran with, oh, it was just a bunch of evil white supremacist Trump supporters, and that needs to be taken care of. I don't know, like, not necessarily. It doesn't have to be this grand conspiracy where people are colluding, but some people are to some degree. Like each one of them individually are colluding in some way. They're conspiring to make their opponent look as bad as they possibly can, and they're lying to do so.
Yeah, so I mean, the Jussie Smollett thing's a great example. I mean, I would say that story is more about a lack of skepticism from a reporter whose biases makes them, they see that story and it confirms their preconceived notions about what the world is, which is that there are Trump supporters running around with nooses and trying to threaten Black people with them. And as ridiculous as that might sound to people who are kind of, living in a world where they know Trump supporters who aren't overt racists carrying around nooses with them, to a reporter who may be functioning inside a really hyper liberal bubble, I think a story like that at first glance sounds plausible and also is a story they know, again, will drive a lot of traffic and attention and kick up a bunch of dust. And so they want to be the first ones to break it. And when you want to be the first ones to break it, you do the least amount of due diligence. And so you maybe run with a story on some thin sourcing or the word of only someone like Jussie Smollett who witnessed it, and nothing from the cops and nothing from anybody who's questioning the story. And that to me is, I think, just as much a story about bad journalism in a really straightforward sense. Like somebody just didn't check check all the boxes on what they need to do before they run
think
their
very
story.
hard about it.
Right. Or think very hard about it. I mean, there was a similar story that I actually wrote about in my newsletter that got, I think, a bit less attention, but it was a story about a volleyball player who was at BYU who sort of alleged one of her family members alleged after the game that there was a student in the BYU school section who was screaming the N-word at her for the entire, the entire match. And that nobody really did anything. And the story broke. I think like one of her family members tweeted it out. It was immediately picked up by all the major news outlets in the country. And there were headlines that sort of explained it, and you click into the article and you realize that it's, just a little bit of hearsay. It's like the family member who tweeted out wasn't actually at the match, but it was something the student had told her. And then kind of weeks went by where BYU was investigating it and the police were investigating it. And this was a Division I volleyball game recorded on 8 cameras from 10 different angles with, everybody's mic'd up, and it just wasn't there. I mean, as far as we know to this day, it did not happen. And, I wrote about that piece in the context of, I don't necessarily blame that student for maybe hearing something that she in her mind thought was this thing, because she lives in a world where she's told constantly that these things are happening a lot, maybe more than they actually are. Not that they never happen, but certainly more frequently than I think they do. And as a result, there's just very little skepticism. And we live in a culture where when she came forward and said this thing happened, there's nobody who's going to stand up and say, if somebody was screaming the N-word at a college volleyball game for 2 hours from a student section, like pretty sure a teacher, a parent, somebody would have done something. 95% of the students, 99.9%
if they were screaming anything for 2 hours straight, somebody would have been like, dude, chill out. But the N-word especially, come on.
Yeah, there would have been somebody who wasn't happy about that and was in earshot and saw what was going on. It would have been a scene. And I was shocked that there was so little skepticism. And, I don't know that that's sort of a reporters colluding as much as it is reporters, many of whom are more on the left politically, who are living in a world where they think something like that actually happens at a BYU volleyball game, and
They
it's a
they
big
want it to be
problem.
true. Like for their narrative's sake, they're willing to accept it at first glance because they're like, this is perfect for our thing. And I mean, I don't. Not that you're saying this necessarily, but I don't buy that. It's just like willful ignorance. I think it's like they have something to profit off of this. Obviously, they have a reason to stir people up, and this works perfectly to do so, and that stirs up profits.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard to speak about this stuff in broad terms because I think,
Sure.
every one of these, the Covington Catholic story, the mishap that happened there was different than the mishap that happened in the Jussie Smollett story.
Yeah.
And I think the reasons are kind of varied sometimes when people make these screw ups, but I absolutely believe that there is a lack of skepticism among many journalists at really important news outlets right now when these stories first break, and there's a desire to be first, and there's the desire to make the story as splashy as possible, and
Right.
all of those things combined create a lot of misinformation in a real literal sense of the word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, you talked about like these businesses, they're doing it for driving up ad revenue, driving up their profits, and that type of thing. You don't take any ad revenue, and you don't go for the sensational approach. So how is it that you're able to survive?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I guess it's probably important to explain a little bit of what the newsletter actually is to make it clear how it works. The general gist of it is that we tackle one big political debate every day. So, today we covered the fact that Nancy Pelosi is stepping down from her leadership post in the Democratic Party. She's obviously a very divisive figure. So people on the left are saying all these things. She's the greatest House Speaker that ever lived. People on the right are saying all these things. Her legacy will be making the debt trillions and trillions of dollars and her partisan pettiness. And so we give like the basic facts. Here's Nancy Pelosi. Here was her career. Here are some of the things that she says are her biggest accomplishments. Here's what some of her critics say. And then we tell you explicitly, here are 3 arguments from the left and 3 arguments from the right about Nancy Pelosi's legacy. So you can read literally side by side some points from the left and some points from the right. And then I, at the end, give my take that's very clearly it's a carved out section that is just for my opinion. It's like a little mini opinion piece where I get to call some balls and strikes on, how I'm viewing both sides' arguments. And I'm not trying to find some middle center ground. I feel differently about every issue depending on what the issue is. So my pledge to readers is I'll just be honest about how I genuinely feel, and I'll try and explain to you why I feel that way.
Yeah.
But my argument's just one of 7 that are inside this newsletter, and you can kind of take it or leave it. So that's the model, which I think gets a lot of people in the door who are just interested in hearing a holistic look at the news. In terms of how we've made money, I've been very explicit that we didn't have any investors. We weren't going to do advertising, and I was bootstrapping the business. So the only way this project would survive is if people subscribed. And in order to incentivize them to subscribe, we keep one newsletter a week behind a paywall. So the newsletter is a daily. It goes out Monday through Friday, Monday through Thursday. All those editions are free. Anybody can read for free as long as they want to try it. And then Friday editions are sort of behind a paywall, and we tease them and we ask people to subscribe just to support us. I actually recently made the decision to start doing some advertising in the newsletter. And basically the reason I did that was because my readers don't really care. I found out the not having investors and not having any kind of association with any larger media organization was a lot more important to people than not running ads. So we made a really transparent ad policy that was just, we're not going to do ads with any groups that have any political affiliations at all. and I'm just going to, do advertisements for products that I like. So other newsletters, or, I don't know, some cool canned mimosa or something, whatever it is, and so we're getting some inbound stuff. We're trying to figure that out right now. And I'm hoping to use the ad revenue to better compete with some of the people in the space. But so far, it's been a really sustainable business model. I mean, we have over 50,000 people on our mailing list, and about 8,000 of them are paying subscribers. So we're making a few $100,000 a year, which is enough to pay me and a small team of people around me. And I think we're going to keep growing because I think there's a real interest in the product and what we're putting out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, back in the days of that HBO show, The Newsroom, when they were like, they had this whole premise of like, hey, wouldn't it be amazing if we had this novel concept of like news reporting, unbiased news? Wouldn't that be great? And it was like, yes. And then, I mean, even in the show, you could see some of the writer's bias, but it was a great show. I think the reason why that doesn't work in real life is because everybody does have a bias, and in such a polarly divisive time. I think what you're doing is great because you're not just saying, I'm a completely unbiased journalist and I'm going to pretend like I don't have, opinions of my own and they're not going to influence my writing. You show one side, then you show the other side, then you show your take on all of it. I think that's great because, because it's like the left and the right are living in literally like different realities. Like you can say one, like different definitions of words, like absolutely polarized. So, yeah, is that kind of what you were going for? Just like put it all out there and, let the chips fall where they may, or what was the plan?
Yeah, I mean, look, my belief is it doesn't matter who you are. To your point, every person brings their own biases in simply by what they've experienced in their life. So, if you're somebody who's been screwed over by a labor union at a job you had for 10 years, then you're going to feel a certain way about labor unions versus somebody who feels like a labor union scored them an incredible deal at their job. And those two things are going to inform those people's opinions, and they're going to matter a lot more than what some news article says about statistics around, how good labor unions are for working class people across the country. And so I know that I have my own biases that pop up in different ways. The most common question I get is, are you on the left or the right? Are you a Democrat or a Republican? And I totally reject the premise of the question because my politics really are incongruent. I think I think the Republican Party and some Republican politicians have a lot of really good ideas, and I feel the same way about Democrats. And I also think that there's a lot of complete nut job people on both sides, and I think there's a lot of really bad ideas on both sides. And so I ask, what are we talking about? What's the topic? Because there's stuff I care a lot about that I think each side is sort of stronger on. And from doing the newsletter, my opinion on certain stuff has changed over time just by going through the process of exposing myself to a lot of different arguments that are out there. So yeah, I mean, it's a really tough, it can be a tough line to walk as someone who's sort of putting their opinions out there every day. But I just remind myself, like, the promise is I'm just going to say honestly what I'm thinking. And I think it's very clear that, every reporter who's out there trying to report, especially by themselves on a news story, brings their own biases in. I mean, the classic example I give is the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, right, are technically the two best newspapers in the country. They're the hardest jobs to get if you're a journalist. They have the highest paid reporters. They have the most resources, the biggest editorial teams. You can go read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times cover two of the exact same event, and you can put their stories side by side from their straight news team, not their opinion sections, two news stories. And the stories will look really different. The first quote will be different. The sources they use will be different. The statistics they use will be different. And that's not because, those journalists are necessarily hacks or are trying to, manipulate the readership. Sometimes that's certainly true, but a lot of the times it's just because they have a network of people that has biases because they have biases, and they've cultivated sources that are on one side of the political spectrum over time. And so those are the people they get quotes from, and those are the people influencing their writing. And I used to read those papers and finally was like, oh, this is a huge problem. Like, it's not a
Yeah.
good thing that I'm seeing two different stories here from two of the best papers in the world with the best journalists in the world. So instead of having to read 20 different news outlets to try and understand what the hell was going on, I thought, what if we brought all these things under one roof into one place and you could get an actual holistic look at the news? And that's sort of what Tangle is.
Awesome. Yeah, I like it, and I'm very similar in trying to be as unbiased as possible at accepting that I have a bias, but being empathetic to people on both sides and trying to see things from their perspective as the media tries and slanders the other side and calling them the devil. But we will get to the bottom of your bias. I don't believe you. Just kidding. But let's take a quick ad break here, and we'll be right back with yeah. We'll get to the bottom of your bias. Don't worry.
We live in a new age, and it's time for us to upgrade our tinfoil hats. Operation Tinfoil is a freedom-focused small business and trusted sponsor of this show. Their super comfortable new line of beanies and baseball caps will not only crown your skull in style, but each of these dome defenders is lined with a silver mesh that blocks up to 99% of EMF radiation from cell phone towers, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and yes, even 5G. We don't know what EMF radiation does to the brain long term, but neither do they, so don't be their guinea pig and don't wait around to find out. Get your stylish tinfoil hat of the future today at gettinfoil.com. Use the promo code SYSTEM for $10 off your order. Again, that's gettinfoil.com. Use the promo code SYSTEM for $10 off your order. Today's episode is sponsored by Astero's Cybersecurity Services. These days, organizations of all sizes are targets for cyber criminals, disgruntled employees, or even nation-state attackers. Astero's performs cybersecurity services providing expert guidance to help organizations defend against threats and protect their data. Astero specializes in penetration testing, where they perform ethical hacking on networks, web apps, or organizations as a whole to simulate what an attacker would do and plug the discovered holes before anyone malicious finds and exploits them. Asteros also specializes in vulnerability management, security awareness training, phishing simulations, cloud security audits, compliance readiness assessments, and much more. As technology expands, it becomes easier and easier to run a business, but if your security is not growing along with your company, then you're going to run into problems. If you don't personally have a company of your own, definitely pass this information along to someone who does, because for a limited time, Asteros is offering companies an attack surface audit completely free. Let Asteros discover potential entry points to your network and how susceptible your company or organization is to cyber attacks. To learn more and to take advantage of this essential offer, just go to asteros.com/free. That's Asteros, ASTEROS.com/free.
And we're back. You've had some time to think about it. I'm just kidding. I totally get where you're coming from. But were you raised more left than right?
Oh yeah,
Do you have
but
more of
both
that
my
background?
parents are pretty big Democrats, definitely on the left. I mean, I would say they're kind of more old school Democrats. I think there's plenty of stuff in like the sort of modern progressive era that they think is a little nutty, but
Yeah.
yeah, like they were
Are they
big
anti-war at
Obama.
least?
Yeah, they're definitely
Okay.
anti-war.
Okay.
They were kind of like the '60s civil rights activists marching against Vietnam style lefties, and I think which is interesting. I mean, I guess sort of in this conversation about even what the left and the right means anymore. I mean, both of them I think are very sort of free speech oriented people as well, which is now something that's much more associated with the right than it was 60 years ago when they were growing up, which I think is a really interesting sort of shift that's happened. And there's a lot of examples of this about how what was left not long ago is now sort of more right, and what was right not long ago is now sort of more left. But yeah, they were big time, Obama supporters and stuff. And I grew up in that. And I understand a lot of it, based on what their experiences were and the things that they wanted and needed at the time. But when I sort of got older, I realized that they weren't right about everything, and there was some bullshit in there too. So we have plenty of kind of burn the house down arguments about politics these days on stuff I don't agree with them about, but that's all part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have the same. We don't really have burn the house down arguments because mine are more avoiders of conflict as good Christian conservatives. But no, it's cool. So when you're putting together these articles, the left and the right, and your own take, do you have like how do you go about cultivating like the best representation of the left, the best representation of the right, and like do you have a team of people that are digging up the best stuff, or are you just looking for the spiciest, most flamboyant take on either side, or how's that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I have, probably 70 to 100 sources for each side that I sort of scour through on whatever issue we're covering. So first of all, I'm doing a ton of reading and listening to podcasts and watching, the primetime TV hosts to see the angles they're taking. I generally have a few things that I'm looking out for. So first of all, I'm trying to make sure that the argument I'm sharing is representative of at least like a strong contingent of whatever side is. So, there a lot of political analysts or pundits today will say that we're actually sort of in four pieces right now, I think, as a country, which is pretty true. I mean, you have kind of the more establishment center left of the Democratic Party, and then you have the progressive wing, which they're pretty divided, and then you have this sort of GOP Republican establishment and kind of the Trump wing, which they're also pretty divided. And so even on what the left's saying and what the right's saying, I think there are often some divisions, especially when you get into stuff like war overseas and what America should be doing in other countries. I think that brings out a lot of really strong divisions in each side. So I try and get three arguments that are like moving out from the center to the kind of whatever quote unquote fringe or the further right, further left, further partisan. So I'll sort of work out from the middle with some sort of center left, center right takes, something that I think is sort of your normie Republican or Democrat, your kind of typical. This is the take that I think if I polled everybody on each side, this would be the one that most people really felt. And then a more far left, more far right take that's just sort of like little bit more the flame throwing kind of partisan side. And sometimes those people are right. I mean, I don't mean to denigrate that as being like, oh, they're wrong. I think, there are some flamethrowers on the left who write about prison reform where I'm reading it and I'm like, oh yeah, I think I agree with these guys more than anybody. So, it really depends what the issue is, but I try and give it like a good mix. And yeah, I have a research intern who helps me out with that. I have a few people on the editorial staff. I'll send out what our topic's going to be a couple days before and let people send me in articles and podcasts and video clips that they found and stuff like that and sort of kind of go through them. And yeah, I'm trying to find arguments that are compelling, that are representative. And then also maybe if it's something that's sort of fresh that I'm not really seeing discussed enough, include it. A lot of it is definitely a little bit of a judgment call, but if you read, 30 or 40 opinion pieces on one topic, you'll see that, if everybody's hammering this one angle, it's like, okay, this is pretty representative of what the right stance is. You can also tell from, what members of Congress and the, various political entities are elevating, which articles and arguments they're elevating. So it's a little bit of everything. And that is definitely the hardest part of the job, is making sure that I'm getting a lot of people's views represented.
Yeah. Speaking of which, so you mentioned the four segments of the spectrum: the hardcore left, the hardcore right, and the more establishment left and establishment right. You left out, you didn't address the porcupine in the room, which is the Libertarian Party, which is just as fractured on a lot of these issues, I got to say.
Yeah.
So that might even be harder to find the libertarian stance on it. But have you ever thought about, looking at some of these, I mean, probably from the way you speak, I would imagine you would agree with the libertarians more than some of the left and some of the right, because we go back and forth based on the issues, it seems.
Totally. Yeah. I had to make kind of a tough decision about fitting in the libertarian voice, which I do very often in the newsletter. And I ultimately landed on kind of putting them center right, which I think is like the closest thing I can get to sort of being accurate. So typically if, we're sharing something from a place like, I don't know, reason.com or something, that's going to, yeah, that's going to fall into kind of like the center right side of the spectrum. I think, ultimately the limited government ideals are much more in line. Even, I know conservatives are kind of going off the rails on this right now, or the Republican Party's going off the rails on this, but certainly, people on the left are very, very selectively in favor of limited government. So, that's typically where the libertarian voice falls into the newsletter. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely feel some identity with a lot of the libertarian perspectives that are out there. I mean, I think when you get down to it and you poke a lot of Americans on just like a general gut feeling and like, what they want their life to be like, most people are not super into the idea of a lot of government involvement in the decisions they get to make and in, the rules they have to follow. And that's very much the American spirit, is kind of like, fuck you, get off my lawn. And I think the Libertarian Party and a lot of libertarian thought leaders embody that spirit. And so, when their views are exposed to people, there's a big audience for them. Unfortunately, I also think the Libertarian Party has done a really bad job at finding candidates who aren't insane to represent them on the national stage, and that's damaged their image in the eyes of a lot of people.
Do you know of any specific ones? Name names.
I'm not particularly keen on naming names, but I would say, I mean, look, I think, I like somebody like Gary Johnson, I think did an unquestionable amount of damage to the libertarian cause by just running and, doing a bunch of media interviews and stuff that he wasn't prepared for, and sort of making himself out to seem like he didn't know what he was talking about. And I mean, he was the last one who I think had a real impact on a presidential race or even an election cycle. And, I liked a lot of what he was running.
What are you saying? Joe Jorgensen wasn't the bastion of hope that you were expecting? What are you talking about, man?
And that's another thing. It's like, Joe Jorgensen had a lot of really good ideas, and there was stuff that I agree with, but you go back and watch some of those interviews and sort of follow some of the reception she got, and it was tough. I mean, it was hard to watch because, again, I think it was like,
you're telling me. I worked on the campaign.
Yeah. Well, I apologize, but yeah, it was. There was stuff that was mishandled there that I think, like, hurt the cause of libertarianism in the long term. So, I really believe there's actually a pretty big appetite for a lot of libertarian ideas, but I just think, they've been drowned out by the sort of duopoly that we've got right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And we don't have to spend any more time talking about the libertarians. They get enough love on this show already. But I did want to get your thoughts on this latest NPR, National Public Radio, headline here on the Trump announcement, which was breaking. Donald Trump, who tried to overthrow the results of the 2020 presidential election and inspired a deadly riot at the Capitol in a desperate attempt to keep himself in power, and then the headline, has filed to run for president again in 2024.
Yeah. I mean, look, that's NPR for you today. I mean, I'm of two minds about it. One is, I'm happy that they wear it on their sleeve these days, and there's no mincing words, and it makes my job kind of easy to be like, oh, right, these folks are on the left, and that's who they are, and there's clearly some agenda there. The other side of it is that it sucks, because I think public radio is really important. I think NPR as an institution was really important and really influential. And I think they've totally alienated a huge swath of the country that's never going to come back and listen to them, in their lifetimes. I mean, one of the funny things that's happening right now is CNN is sort of realizing some of the damage they did to themselves during the last few years of the Trump presidency. And they have a new president who's clearing out a bunch of people from the primetime lineup and a bunch of high profile folks. And he's sort of trying to pivot them back into nonpartisan centrist news. And it's like no Trump supporter who was alive from 2015 to 2022 is ever going to watch CNN or give them money or care about what they say ever again for as long as they're alive. And so it's like they've just totally poisoned the well for a whole generation of people. And I think NPR's done that. And like I said, I mean, look, my parents are liberals and Democrats, and I grew up listening to NPR in the car, and there were tons of really good radio programs, political and non-political, that I loved as a kid and a teenager and even a college student. And I listen to it now, and it's a different station. I mean, it's a different channel, and I don't think it's a good look for them. I think they're hurting themselves.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. And I did want to pick your brain on, like, for me, I identify mostly as libertarian, and because of that, I get called in the same day a white supremacist and a communist, depending on what I posted on Twitter. And you're kind of in the same boat where you're kind of not really playing a middle ground, but you're not going with the cults and just going with the talk points. What has been kind of the feedback with this thing as you try and be as unbiased as possible? Are you getting a lot of pushback, or they think that you're leaning too heavily one way or the other?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, so first of all, I have to be honest. The majority of the feedback that I get on the newsletter is actually really positive. I am way more optimistic about the country and the state of the psyche of people who are politically engaged now than I was when I started. So that's the good news. I can happily report that there are tens and tens of thousands of people out there who are really interested in getting the truth, who really are open-minded enough to hear other people's arguments, who are willing to change their minds about certain things, and who are subscribed to our newsletter happily and are that way, even though they have really strong political beliefs. So they're running into ideas and thoughts that they hate every day, but they still read it because they're curious enough and open-minded enough to do that. And that's people on both sides of the spectrum. So that's the good news. The bad news is, yeah, I mean, I every day I get emails that are like, you're like, oh, I thought this was supposed to be unbiased. It's clear it's not. I can't believe, I gave you a donation or subscribed. And honestly, my question is always, what way do you think I'm biased? I mean, what prompted this? Because I have 5 emails before you from the last 6 hours of one person telling me I'm a closet Trump supporter, another person telling me I'm a closet liberal. So you're going to have to be more specific. I don't really know what you mean. And when they say it, they often think I'm going to know that how they feel about, my biases, when I have to say, I actually don't know in what way you think I'm biased. So if you could flesh that out, it'd be super helpful for me as like a touch point. Typically what happens is the feedback goes one direction based on what day somebody signs up. So a lot of people make the call in the first or second newsletter they get. And, it's like if you subscribe to my newsletter when Twitter banned Trump from the platform, if you subscribe that week, you would have thought I was a really big Trumper because I was trashing that decision and saying I thought it was the wrong move and that it would come back to bite them, which now, of course, Twitter has admitted that it was, not even Elon. I know Elon's reinstating Trump, who may or may not come back, but even Jack said at the time, weeks later, months later, that they could have handled it better and maybe they didn't make the right call. But if you subscribe to my newsletter, the day after January 6th, you would have thought that I was a diehard anti-Trumper because I wrote that, he did a horrible job managing the people who really loved him, and that, I thought it was a disgraceful day for the country. And there were clearly a bunch of people who loved him who were out of their minds. And so, that it just depends when you subscribe, it depends what
and they're
day
sitting
you
in
sign
jail
up
right
on.
now, and he's not supporting them at all. So like,
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't think January 6th was that big of a deal. And also I think that Donald Trump is kind of a piece of shit for how he handled it, I don't think he incited it, but I think that he didn't give a crap what they did and just distanced himself from it and condemned them when they were there to support him. So it's like, yeah, I'm so sick of having to defend Donald Trump when they spend years and years blasting him for completely made up bullshit. But at the same time, I don't think he's a good guy, and I don't want him to be president. I don't know if that makes me a white supremacist or a communist. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, look, interestingly enough, after this election, the midterms, there was all this talk about whether Trump was to blame or the establishment was to blame because Republicans underperformed. They didn't do as well as people thought they were going to do. And I polled, so we have a pretty diverse readership. About 25% of our readers identify as conservative and were Trump voters in 2016 and 2020. About 40% are sort of, left-leaning Democrats, whatever. And then there's a big range of people who say they're independent or in the middle or maybe libertarian or Green Party or whatever. And I polled readers recently, just saying like, would you vote for Trump? Did you vote for Trump in 2016? Did you vote for him in 2020? Now that he's announced he's running, would you vote for him again in 2024? And I also asked them to, email me back. If you were a 2-time Trump voter, I'd love to hear from you and hear about what you're thinking about his announcement that he was going to run again. And I probably got like 100 written emails to that newsletter from people who said I voted for him in 2016 and 2020. And 3 people told me that they would vote for him again in 2024. So, it's a small sample size. These are people who are reading my newsletter who are, I'm sure their politics are a little more moderate than your average Trump supporter. But I think there's a lot of people out there who are, who loved what he did and supported him and like a lot of things about him, but are just so tired of having to defend him and keep up with the news and deal with all the bullshit that comes with him. So, people are complex. It's not a simple thing out there. And I think everybody likes to see the world in black and white, but it's not always like that.
Absolutely. I do want to get your thoughts on the whole Elon Musk thing that's going on right now, because he purchased Twitter, as we all know, and he's bringing people back left and right. He brought Trump back. He brought even Kathy Griffin back, but he's not bringing Alex Jones back, and some people are pissed off about that, and there's some back and forth. As the free speech advocate that he pretends to be, I'm not a huge Alex Jones fan, even as a conspiracy guy, but I'm like, because he made this argument just within the last 24 hours of he's not bringing him back because Elon Musk had to hold his child in his arms as it died and gave this sad story, which is terrible. It's bad. But at the same time, it's like, if you're just making your decisions based on how you feel today or tomorrow, then how are you any different than the last people, except for your feelings sometimes agree with different people than the former CEO did?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, I guess I'll answer this question in a couple of ways. I mean, when Elon was on the board of Twitter, when they announced that he was going to join the board of Twitter, which was how this all started, if you remember, I was pretty big in favor of it. I mean, I wrote a whole piece. My take in that we did a newsletter on it was that I thought it'd be really good to have more ideological diversity at Twitter. I don't think Elon is some big Trump loving Republican. I think he's a kind of a like anti-woke liberal Democrat who cares a ton about climate change and is kind of hates the government probably because he has to pay an ungodly amount of money in taxes every year. And
he also receives a lot more money from them than I ever have. So
yeah, that's true too. And so I was sort of like, yeah, great. Put him on the board. He's clearly a smart guy who's got a really, an odd grouping of political views, and he's powerful. And I think it'd be good to sort of have somebody in there to kick things around and change things up. When he bought Twitter, I was a little more hesitant because I was like, I don't love the idea of one of the richest people in the world owning this information ecosystem. We've got lots of billionaires who own lots of news outlets, and I'm just not crazy about how that makes me feel. It just makes me feel a little icky. But I was like, you know what? Twitter kind of sucks in a lot of ways. And Elon has run a ton of successful companies, and I'm really curious to see what he does with it. I think his first few weeks as a CEO have been kind of a shit show. I mean, like, regardless of the policy changes he's making, I think the stuff that he's doing and how he's sort of conducting himself has been pretty disappointing for me as someone who kind of went to bat for him. I mean, like, the simple example is just him firing a bunch of people and then having to try and rehire them all like 2 days later because he apparently fired a bunch of people he realized he couldn't live without. That's not like a good sign that he's running things well or being particularly cautious about how he's handling stuff. So,
or the blue checks and then the no checks and then the double blue checks, because I don't know how this works.
Yeah. And then it's just like, there's all this weird bugginess going on. And it was just like, okay, this has not been smooth. And I was preparing to write kind of a follow-up of like, I was kind of wrong about Elon. I'm happy that, Trump and Kathy Griffin and Jordan Peterson, whatever, are being reinstated. I think suspensions on Twitter and other social media platforms for people violating the rules is totally reasonable. I'm still not totally sure what rules Trump violated. I don't think permanent bans are good. I don't think that's like a great solution.
Yeah.
I'm really mixed about Alex Jones. I don't envy the position Elon is in to have to make that choice. I mean, I think Alex Jones very clearly violated some of the kind of targeting and harassment policies that Twitter has, and they have a right to make those policies as a private company. I think what he did with like the Sandy Hook parents is pretty despicable, and I certainly think I understand why a lot of people kind of loathe him for that. I thought Elon's tweet about the whole thing and holding his dead baby was really weird. I thought that was like a bizarre. That just made it seem like, okay, so you're just making the decisions. Like I thought there was going to be a board and you were going to consult all these people who are ideologically diverse. Like,
Right.
but you're just saying you have this personal experience, and so there's no way he's out. But at the same time,
Not to
something
mention
I've written,
all the presidents who have killed children that are still on the platform, or terrorists
yeah,
and all sorts of people that are much worse than Alex Jones saying something nasty about people whose children have died. It's not even comparable.
yeah, like you allow Ayatollah Khomeini on, and Al
Right.
Qaeda can have a Twitter account, but Trump and Alex Jones can. It's not really consistent, and that's ultimately what I want. I want consistent application of whatever these rules or policies are. But I'm I at the same time, despite being somebody who really doesn't like Alex Jones and is like happy to see him get sued out of his ass and whatever, deplatformed, quote unquote. I think it's also really bad. I mean, I like even for the people who want him to have less influence, I think it martyrs him, and I think it makes him more popular. And it's not a matter of what I think even anymore. You can just go look at how his career trajectory has gone since he got banned from Twitter. And it's like his following grew, he made more money, and he's out at all these big events. Everybody's worried about J6 and whatever else with a megaphone and thousands of people following his orders. And it's not like they've taken away his influence or made him less relevant. They've made him a household name by martyring him. And I think,
Yeah.
if they had allowed him to stay on the platform and let him get dunked on all the time, he probably would have, he'd be, less important and less influential than he is now. And I think that's the problem with deplatforming, is that I don't think it actually works a lot of the time.
I'm not a big fan of Alex Jones, but do you really think that he should have been sued? Do you really think, like, what is it, like up to like $3 trillion? I don't know. It goes up every week. The size of a medium-sized country is really a fair judgment for a guy who said some things?
I don't think it's a fair judgment in the sense that, like, he's paying, or he's on the hook or whatever. I don't know what he's going to actually pay for, like 5 times the amount of the greatest amount that any Wall Street corporate executive paid for the 2008 financial crisis. I mean, I think that's an absurdity. That being said, I think that he was certainly liable for certain damages to these families in terms of like the harassment that they had to face because of some of the stuff that he did on YouTube and his podcasts. And, I don't really know what the monetary damages for something like that should look like. But I think if you're, posting pictures of somebody's house and saying, here are the parents who are lying about their dead kids, and then people go find their house and stake it out and send them all sorts of crazy emails and stuff, I think those people have, maybe they don't get to sue Alex Jones. Maybe they get to sue the platform. Maybe they get to sue the individuals who actually harass them. But I think they're due some kind of protection. I don't know. It's hard to say exactly what that looks like. But yeah, I mean, for sure, the numbers are insane, and he's never going to pay that. And
They're just made up numbers. They're completely
yeah,
imaginary.
they're just made up numbers, and that I think that much is totally true. And I certainly think if you're talking about scale of damages of what somebody's done, again, the idea that people who knowingly put the entire country's financial institutions at risk with like bullshit mortgages and faulty loans never face even a fraction of the consequences financially that he has. I think that's like an indictment on the justice system and kind of the country that we're living in right now.
Absolutely. Now we're right at the hour mark, but I do want to get your thoughts on the future. You said that you do have a bright outlook for the future, and you would have to in order to be willing to show both sides, because I feel like most people aren't even willing to show the other side unless they're making fun of it. So, what is the future? What does the future of Tangle look like? And are there other people doing this? What gives you that sense of hope in this very divided, very polarizing doublespeak time?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, look, my future is I want to get as many people signed up for Tangle as possible. I appreciate your little readtangle.com URL right there, and that's like my number one goal. It's why I come on podcasts like this to talk to anybody who wants to talk, regardless of where they're at on the political spectrum or what their worldviews are. I mean, I believe we're building some. I mean, I know we're building something. We've surveyed readers from across the political spectrum, and what we find is that regardless of someone's political affiliation, they rate their trust in what we're doing in the Tangle newsletter literally almost identical. I think the floor is like 94.5% of all of our readers say that they find our content very or somewhat trustworthy. And it's even from, both sides of the political spectrum, which to me tells me that we're winning over people who have really varied political views. My goal now in the next year or two is to start putting a lot of money back into growing what we're doing and growing our mailing list and sort of expanding our reach. I think we mentioned, our mailing list is a little over 50,000 people. So to me, that number, when I started this 3 years ago, is unthinkable. It's awesome. It's a great milestone. But, 3 million people watch Fox News every night, and, a fraction of that watch CNN or MSNBC or whatever. They're kind of getting blown out of the water right now. But I want to scale that. I want to have 1 million people on the mailing list to really have an influence. And so we're starting to switch gears. We think we have a proof of product, and now we want to really grow the mailing list and expand this and get as many people reading it as possible. Because I think it's good for the psyche of the country. I think it makes people understand the other side more than they do right now. I think it's good for a lot of free speech tenets that both sides of the aisle seem to appreciate at various times in their political histories, which is, the capacity to debate and argue about issues in a reasonable way, and in compelling ways. And I think people who read our newsletter have a better understanding of what's going on in the country than people who don't. And I feel really, really confident about that. So yeah, we're like full throttle ahead on growth. I'm hoping to get a YouTube channel up probably sometime next year. We've got a podcast rolling already, and I'm building out the network. I mean, there are definitely a lot of people who, maybe they're not doing exactly what we're doing, but they're really interested in sort of this nonpartisan, turn down the temperature. Let's just it's not like kumbaya, let's all hold hands and be best friends. It's like, we don't even understand what the other side thinks, and they're just caricatures in the mainstream media now. So let's try and at least get an idea of why we disagree or what we disagree about. And when you do that, you find some common ground. Sometimes you find out that, yeah, actually you do really disagree with the other side, but we don't have to hate each other and be shooting people and going nuts and all this political violence and rioting and all the craziness. We used to live in a country, I think, where you could share a beer with somebody who disagreed with you about it and argue about it, and at the end of the night still be buddies. And we don't really have that country anymore, which scares me a lot. So I'm hoping to bring some of that back for sure.
Absolutely. I feel exactly the same way. And I feel like when a lot of people voted for Biden just because they thought that would be the turning down of the temperature, because we're going back to just a boring old politician. So far, it's not going great. But yeah, man, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I know that we probably disagree on quite a bit. I've listened to some of your podcasts. It's really good, and I don't care that we disagree on some things, because this is what this show is all about, too, is just having the conversation and figuring out why people believe what they believe and being empathetic to them. So tell people where they can find the podcast, where they can find the newsletter and the website and all this stuff.
Yeah, so readtangle.com is our home for everything. If you go there, you'll get hit with a little splash page to sign up, and you can do that. Just punch in your email, and you can read Tangle for free for as long as you'd like. And if you end up deciding you want to support our work financially, that's great. And if you don't, it's no problem. The website has links out to the podcast and all that stuff, but you can, find it just by searching Tangle or Tangle News anywhere you get your podcasts, and subscribe and give us a listen. And yeah, once you're in the network, you'll hear from us and kind of go from there. So it's pretty simple. And yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I think I think it's really important to have these conversations. I love that to be on a podcast like this where you talk about, not just politics, but all sorts of stuff outside the box and conspiracies and whatever. I'm kind of one of my big conspiracies is on UFOs. So maybe one day I'll be able to come back and we can talk shop about that. But yeah, I love people who are not just swallowing the mainstream narrative whole. I think that's really important. I think skepticism's good. So anybody who feels that way, I think should come check out what we're doing.
Absolutely. I would recommend it as well. Thanks, man, so much for being here. My outro is long, so you can bail. You don't have to stick around. I know we're over time, but thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it.
All right, ladies, gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in on this Monday edition of The System is Down. Do go check out Tangle at readtangle.com and find out what the left is thinking, the right is thinking, and what Isaac is thinking. And, do your own research. I know it's a scary thing to do or even say these days, but this guy's he's being honest about it. He's basically doing what I'm doing, but he's giving both of the other sides as well instead of just giving his opinion. But my opinion is obviously the most valuable in all of the political spectrum. So thank you for being here to tune in to the best political opinion that there is to offer. I'm just kidding, obviously. But I don't know what this week is going to look like as far as other shows, as far as Tuesday and Thursday. Craig's going to be in town. Maybe we'll do a 2 Scoops on Thursday live. I don't know. Lots of things. It's a holiday week. I don't know what Wednesday is going to hold. I'll probably have to do something because no matter how, the holidays do not determine whether or not the news happens. The news happens whether we want it to or not. And the news happens whether I want to do it or not. I'm just debating on whether or not I'll have time. So stick around, tune in, keep an eye on thesystemsdown.tv, at TSIDpod, and all the places that you follow my nonsense. But thanks, guys, for being here, and we'll see you when we see you. Until then, question everything, stay uncomfortable, and we'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.
Dun, 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 dun.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe on your way out and help us change the world one uncomfortable conversation at a time. And if you like what you hear and you want to hear more, go join the Downers Club at patreon.com/thesystemsdown for bonus episodes of the show every single week. Until next time, please continue to question everything, stay uncomfortable, and I'll talk to you then. Thanks.
This has been a Goulash Media production. goulashmedia.net.
This concludes our broadcast day. Click.